Okay, let's now work a little bit more with the equation of exchange, and let's convert it into a different form so that it shows what I said at the end of the last video, which was that whenever the money supply grows faster than the output of real goods and services, then we have inflation, and whenever the output of goods and services grows faster than the money supply, we will have deflation. So we start again with our Cambridge equation, which says the money supply times its velocity equals real output times the price level. Okay, but I'm interested in the price level. So the price level is equal to m times v over y. So now I want to differentiate that, and I want to say, a small change in the price level. And whenever we say, in economics or in math, there's a small change, we give it a little delta. So then we call that delta P, that's the Greek letter for delta, triangle. So then the change is equal to the change in the money supply plus the change of velocity. Okay, so whenever you take a differential, then terms that are multiplied, they are being added, and but things that are divided, they are subtracted. So minus delta y. So the change in the price level, so the price level is a stock variable, but the change, that is a flow. So that is basically inflation. The change in the price level, that's inflation. Okay, delta M, that is the change in money supply. Change in money supply. Then delta V is the change in velocity, but because velocity is constant, a constant doesn't change over time, so that is still zero. So, and minus delta Y, so that is the change in output. Okay, so now we can see we always have inflation when the change in the money supply is greater than the change in output. And likewise, if the change in output were greater than the change in the money supply, then we had deflation. And that is what you basically see here. So again, in short, whenever the money supply grows faster than the real output, there will be inflation. And whenever the real output grows faster than the money supply, there will be deflation. Okay. Well, so now you may remember earlier we said inflation can have two causes. One cause is cost-push inflation. So we said there's cost-push inflation. Let's say like in the 1970s, during the oil price crisis, that was an example of cost-push inflation. And that was the first kind, and the second was demand-pull inflation, demand pull. Inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. Yeah, it actually makes sense, demand pull, because demand pull inflation basically means that the government pulls demand with printed money. So yeah, the money supply grows faster. But in cost push inflation, we don't really have a change in the money supply that caused inflation. But when we say inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, what it means, for example, with respect to cost-push inflation, even if we have cost-push inflation, well, if we reduce the money supply, we should be able to rein in again inflation. So in other words, inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, can be maybe best understood so that it matches both cost-push inflation and demand-pull inflation. So inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, can be best understood if we say, well, whenever there is inflation, no matter what it is, cost push or demand pull, if we reduce again the money supply, we will rein in inflation. Okay. And it becomes clear whenever there's inflation, well, I should always be able to reduce it by lowering the change in the money supply. And that is typically what you do. The response to inflation is always reducing the money supply. And the way that is typically done is by increasing the interest rates. So, because whenever people get very high interest rates, then they have an incentive to deposit their money within the banking system, and once it is in the banking system, also the Federal Reserve can suck it out quite easily with its various policies that it has at hand. But we don't have to go in all the details of money in banking, but fighting inflation requires the reduction in the money supply, and reducing the money supply always requires higher interest rates. That's why a lot of countries that have a lot of inflation, that they also have a very high interest rate. Okay, but I hope it is clear what we mean whenever we say inflation is always a monetary phenomenon.